for giving your time, and first of all, a warm welcome to the Interspecies Conclave hosted by Atria University. You, of course, have a very interesting profile because I was hearing your speech this morning. And before I dig deeper and kind of ask more about your experience, for my first question to you will be, how long have you been living in India? And how is your Indian experience being before we kind of go back to a global experience?
Hello, Deep. It's a pleasure to be here and to see this day come into action. I think it had a long gestation time. I've been in India for 2 years. Actually, Monday marks my 2-year anniversary, and it is also the halfway mark of the 4 years that I get to spend in India. And I'm having a fantastic time. Really, India is, in many ways, it feels like the nation of the moment. There are many reasons for that. There is a thriving innovation scene here. There are exciting developments in the technology and in the scientific community, like Atria University, a startup university with a big and bold ambition. There are geopolitical reasons that make India the country of the moment for many ways. Both the West and the rest are courting India and want to bring India close to their side and their interests. And India is, of course, holding the presidency of the G20 this year, and it feels a little bit like it's a moment of India entering the global stage with a certain force and with a certain self-confidence. So all of these elements, plus the wonderful people that I get to have around me on my Indian journey, from my team to partners such as Kaushik and the Atria University team, make it a very exciting place to be, a very meaningful place to be, with plenty of opportunities.
Oh, super. So, you were just talking and you mentioned that the whole concept of interspecies movement, you kind of discussed it with Kaushik, I believe in his house or your house like a year ago. Why don't you walk our viewers through it? Like, how was, I'm sure must have been quite a journey to see just a discussion now being transformed into a full-blown movement with different stakeholders who are involved now and who want to kind of take it ahead. So how did that whole thing happen? Just walk a little bit backwards.
I have to go back 10 years to May of 2013, which was the first time that I came across Jonathan Ledgard.
Sure.
At the time, I was living in Boston and I was unemployed. And I was attending as many lectures and conferences and events as I could at MIT, because my dream was to become part of the MIT community at the time. And one such lecture that I attended at the MIT Media Lab was by this gentleman named Jonathan Ledgard, and the description said something. He used to be the correspondent for The Economist out of Africa or East Africa. And he had started running a lab at a Swiss university. Me being Swiss, I was, of course, interested at EPFL, a lab called Afrotech Lab. And my interest being in science and technology, and regionally, particularly on sub-Saharan Africa, was immediately drawn to him. And I met him and I heard his presentation about the flying donkeys, so the pioneering work that he did in pushing for drones to become cargo drones in sub-Saharan Africa. The red line, the red line and the blue line, and then the zip line. That was my first encounter with him. And I kept him in mind, in the back of my mind, so that when I was recruited by Swissnex a couple of years later in 2015, I still knew there's this interesting Brit, Scotsman, who is in Switzerland. And as soon as I could, I found an excuse to get him back to Boston and do a project with him. And at the time, the project was focusing on the drone port. Okay. So he partnered with Lord Norman Foster, the architect, on building the drone ports. Okay. And there was a civil engineer at MIT, John Oxendorf, who was involved in the project, and they were building a pilot for the Venice Architecture Biennale. And these drone ports were to serve as community hubs and maker spaces where you could repair and service and become really hubs of economic activity. So it wasn't just about the technology, but it was about how do you embed the use of the technology so that it creates a meaningful hub for a local community in a remote area of some African country. Rwanda became the place that adopted this, and that's where Zipline took off, and that's where Rwanda became the first country on earth to have civilian drone regulations, and Jonathan was sort of the pioneer that originated all of this. And then I hadn't kept in touch with him for some time. He left EPFL, and I think he moved to the Czech Republic. He's had a lot of success with his novels.
I've seen a couple of his videos in Prague festivals, yes.
And one of his novels, Submergence, I believe, was turned into a Hollywood movie. And then in early 2022, I was in India, and I was on my terrace reading a Brookings publication entitled Breakthroughs, Breakthrough Technologies to Accelerate the Sustainable Development Goals, or something like that was the title. And I see that there are 2 chapters in that book that immediately caught my eye because I knew 2 of the authors. And one was Jonathan Ledgard with his chapter on interspecies money, and another one was a Ghanaian friend with a chapter on transmediation. And I read Jonathan's chapter in January of 2022, and it is rare that you read something and you get giddy as you're reading it. It's, oh my God, this is revolutionary. This, like, I can't remember the last time that I read something that I felt the way when I read Jonathan's essay. And I was like, this is brilliant. This is completely, it's subversive in a way because it's looking to use the very system that has perpetuated a lot of sort of this materialistic consumption society and putting a value on non-human beings, non-human species, other species, for them to defend and protect and advance their interests. I thought it was a brilliant idea. And I was immediately enamored with it and started talking about it with friends here and there. And one such conversation took place in July of last year. It was actually July 15th. I remember the dates.
Oh, wow.
Somehow I'm good with remembering dates.
The numbers for sure.
Kaushik came to my house with a few other friends on a Friday night. And one of the topics of the conversation was my excitement and for this idea and sharing this with him and everybody else. And it took a few months. And a few months after that, Kaushik got in touch with me. Hey, can we talk? Sure. Calls me and we have a conversation. Said, this interspecies money idea, we got to do something with it. And immediately the response was yes, whatever we can do, let's figure it out. I mean, let's reach out to Jonathan and get him involved and say we're interested in exploring something. And from then on, Kaushik took the lead, and I played more of an enabler role. And it's been a fantastic journey. And I'm so happy for him. I'm happy for Atria University to have gotten this far. And of course, the journey doesn't end here.
No, for sure not. This is massive. I mean, you've started a movement, and and I think all of us who participated in the conference today in any capacity are just very lucky to be a part of something which is legendary. Because one thing which I personally found very interesting about interspecies movement is the fact that no one questions the aim. Everyone's recognizing the fact that that it's high time that. Before that, I'll give you an interesting case in India where a local high court actually kind of gave rights to the rivers. So it kind of voted for rights to the rivers, saying that if there is a religious importance and we call rivers our mothers, and then rivers are human beings. So with that notion, I think that is a similar prerogative to also interspecies money, because that's one thing which I know that no one questions, and everyone is pro the aim. Now, my next question to you is kind of a similar initiative, which again is happening in South Africa, Wildcard. So again, where in a system like this, you get to adopt an animal from an endangered species, be a guardian, commit to a monthly donation. Now, this is a question which may not be prevalent now, but once the first implementation phase starts, maybe a decade or in 2 decades, this will come into place. That here we are exposing animal data to an unregulated space which is not protected, because if I am, let's say, have to poach an elephant, all I have to do is commit to a monthly donation and I'll get the coordinates. And, so where do you see the evolvement of privacy, regulation, and protection in this sphere? Because a lot of conversations around the interspecies movement is happening in the virtual space. We're involving tech, we're involving AI, we're involving digital kind of transaction in that way. So where do you envision this to happen?
it's a very fascinating question that I actually just discussed over lunch today with Jonathan. I mentioned the example of my mother had adopted via distance a child in Rwanda after the genocide and paid for her schooling, for her monthly schooling. And of course here we're not talking about humans, but we're talking about adopting an animal species in this example. I think that will likely be a way to engage people emotionally and through the storytelling, and perhaps even a way to diversify from the usual species that get the bulk of the attention. That this could be a very interesting way to broaden that. To come to the second part of your question, the privacy one, I am rather skeptical that the interspecies money element can make a meaningful contribution on the privacy aspect, for the simple reason that we are so bad at protecting the privacy of human individuals in the digital realm, that I don't see how we are positioned to necessarily do any better for non-humans. That being said, the idea, the risk that the idea of interspecies money be used for, say, poaching, to use the information that might be available on a certain species, say on a rhino or an elephant, to poach them for the tusks or for whatever reason, be it their fur or any other element of the animal that poachers may have an interest in. I mean, the counter argument is that you would pay the poacher for the protection, and the poacher would switch sides, essentially. Sure. I mean, the idea, one of the ideas of interspecies money is to flip that, so that the poachers ostensibly are not poachers. I don't think that they enrich themselves particularly. It's a subsistence in many poor areas. Of course, then the market, as it moves downstream, there may be people enriching themselves and middlemen, but the actual people who poach, my assumption is that they are more likely to be doing this because of lack of better alternatives.
Sure, thank you. So now this initiative that you've started with Swissnex, and Swissnex is a non-governmental agency aiming at international reforms, if I may have understood the
We're a governmental agency. I'm the Consul General of Switzerland, so I represent the Swiss government to South India, and I'm the CEO of Swissnex, which is a diplomatic mission. It's just a diplomatic anomaly. It's a diplomatic representation that strives to accelerate positive transformations at the frontiers of knowledge. And this is our vision. This is what motivates us and what excites us to be part of initiatives like this. And of course, today we have not had a substantive Swiss presence yet, but of course we see enormous potential for Switzerland and Swiss stakeholders in the knowledge economy in particular, and in the knowledge space in particular, to play an important role, whether this is through the banking system, which is of course very strongly anchored in Switzerland, whether this is through the blockchain technology, which has a very, very strong anchor with the crypto valley in Switzerland, whether this is through some of the outstanding research institutions in Switzerland. In fact, one of Jonathan's collaborators in Rwanda is Professor Claudio Tessone at the University of Zurich, whom we're also in conversation with for partnerships with stakeholders in India. And while he could not make it today for this specific conclave, he is somebody that we definitely want to rope into as the collaboration grows.
So I kind of worded that question to hear this for sure, and you said diplomatic missions. So when we talk about missions as such, international cooperation is a quintessential given. So now in a movement like this, one thing is for sure that it needs to support from more international organizations, agencies to support, and for the simple reason because it's the whole world we're looking at and not just one particular area. While one begins at an area, the objective is always very macro. Do you see this movement collaborating with, let's say, the UN Convention on Biodiversity anytime soon? Because that is one question which I was very curious, because while there are existing efforts of the international community, international instrument, international law, to whatever level it can, if not obligate but kind of request countries to meet their obligations. How do you see this movement transcribing into international cooperation?
Well, the hope is definitely that it becomes a global movement. And as the discussions today have shown, the goal is this would not make sense if it is not done on a global scale. It makes sense to start with local pilots, but it needs to have a global mindset and it needs to have a global vision. The end game has to be global because it's not going to work if it's patchwork or if it's just having a more localized approach. Localized pilots, absolutely, that's how you start, that's how you learn, that's how you iterate, but you need to have a global outlook for this. And I mean, Jonathan's vision is to create the bank of other species. And we were talking with Jonathan about this novel that came out a few years ago, The Ministry for the Future. And he's actually friends with the author of The Ministry for the Future. And actually in conversation with Mr. Robinson, I believe is the name of the author, he was saying, well, actually the Bank of Other Species should spin out of the idea of the Ministry for the Future. So we should both create the Ministry for the Future and the Bank of Other Species. And that means linking it to existing entities such as the UN Convention on Biodiversity. Absolutely, I've had the pleasure of working with them a couple of years ago in my Swissnex in Boston iteration. And I've shared Jonathan's paper with the new president of the World Wildlife Fund, who is also somebody whom I've had the fortune of collaborating in my Boston years. And the goal is very much to rope them in. In all honesty, I don't think it is contingent upon Swissnex. I don't think it's in our capacity to bring them on board. But because some connections exist, it doesn't hurt to knock on doors. And our job, the way I conceive of my job, it's to engineer serendipity. And if I reflect on the journey of these last 10 years, from the first time that I met Jonathan and I heard him speak to today, and the fact that this day could happen because a series of serendipitous coincidences, and not just coincidences, but we created the conditions for serendipity to happen to lead us to here. And again, this is just a start. So our commitment is to continue doing what we can to foster this, and to continue thinking in what ways can Swiss stakeholders meaningfully contribute to making interspecies money a global phenomenon. Let's see where this will take us.
So is ours at Atria to support this movement and be a pioneer to kind of take this to the global scale and communicate, as you said, with the right people to ensure there's more support in this movement. My last question to you would be about Atria. Now, since you have known Atria quite closely, you've known the visionaries behind Atria. Now, we specialize in interdisciplinary STEM education, which, as we very proudly call ourselves, the first, beyond a university, the first liberal STEM university in Asia, where we are teaching students in science, in STEM, how to not look at a problem with one lens. Like, because today, as we say, modern problems, modern solutions, every problem needs to be looked at different lenses. And that's what we are teaching students, that it's not just the right answer just because you are in STEM. You have to think of other answers as well. You have to think of other prerogatives. So when such universities are leading movements like the Interspecies Conclave and creating that kind of scenario for young minds, how important do you think, or let's say this, how successful do you think these universities will be in future when it comes to the overall objective of the movement?
I can't predict how successful it will be, but I can certainly say that I hope, just like I feel like in this year, India has entered the global arena with a certain self-confidence and with a certain assertiveness. I hope that the entry into the interspecies arena for Atria University may represent for the university sort of this entry and claiming, putting a flag into the academic landscape and say, hey, we exist, we are here, this is what we're about. We're a liberal STEM university that is trying to think about higher education in the 21st century in the context of India differently. And this is what we're about, and interspecies money is sort of the flagship way for the university to make itself known regionally, nationally, and internationally. And I think it's a brilliant way to do that. I think it's visionary to have a startup university that wants to be different. I think higher education higher education is a very conservative sector. Not just in India. There's a beautiful quote by Joseph Aoun, who is the president of Northeastern University, one of Boston's fastest growing universities, and he says, higher education is a very conservative sector. We're in the business of changing the world, but we don't want to change ourselves. Atria University is sort of taking the bull by the horns and saying change is the name of the game, and we want to be different. And the track record is being built. This is a young university. You have a few years under your belt. You have your first cohorts of students enrolled. And I think Atria University is in it for the long game, and it's learning by doing. And I think one can only commend the visionaries like Sundar Raju and the family and Kaushik and everybody else involved for getting it to where it is and building the vision. But this is just the start.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your time. I really am very happy I got to speak to you about it. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, Deep.
Grand merci. C'est vraiment gentil de votre côté. Merci.
De rien, c'est un plaisir.